guys, today's speaker is Dr. Andy Bannister. Andy is a renowned speaker, author and thinker at the intersection of faith, philosophy and culture. He's also the director of SOLAS, an evangelist training organisation covering the whole of the UK, and is a PhD in Islamic studies. Andy will be giving a talk on this, so please welcome him, guys.
Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for turning out this evening. Great to be with you here at Canford School. I was actually here back in February for an entire week for the Canford Mission Week, and it's great to be back, so thank you for inviting me again. I'm quite unusual, actually, as a speaker and a writer. Ben's introduction picked that somewhat up. I'm a Christian philosopher, very much so. But I'm unusual in that my PhD was in Islamic studies, and before that, my first love was computer science. I came with an absolute whisker of doing a degree in artificial intelligence and linguistics, at Sussex University, but instead I chose, well, what else would one choose? I chose the theology and philosophy route, but then ironically all these things play out. I actually ended up using machine learning during my PhD. My PhD was using computer analysis to study texts, particularly using machine learning to look at the Quran and try and figure out and demonstrate how the Quran was first composed. But in the last few years, the kind of circle has gone right the way around, and I'm easing my way back into AI. And I've been fascinated by the way that artificial intelligence both raises some profound new questions, and it also sheds light on some old questions. And it's those old questions we're going to think a bit about in this session, because I'm going to suggest to you this evening that artificial intelligence may actually offer us some really fresh insights on some three very famous classical arguments for the existence of God. Now, we're going to cover a lot this evening. So the good news is I have made available to Mr. Leaper, is it Leaper or
yeah, it is.
Leaper? Yeah. To Mr. Leaper, I've made the slides available as a PDF, so he will send those around to you, anyone who wants them afterwards. So if you're a kind of note-taking type, you haven't got to capture everything on this slightly strangely coloured screen behind me. But the first thing, before we dig into that philosophy of those arguments, we need to ask ourselves a question. What do we actually mean by artificial intelligence? You know, that phrase is thrown around a lot. Marketeers have figured out if you stick the word AI on anything, they can increase the price by 10%. What does AI actually mean? Well, here's one definition from one of the most famous computer scientists in the world, Marvin Minsky. Marvin said that AI is the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by humans. Not a bad definition. Or you might tweak what the famous British scientist Alan Turing, although he wrote before the term AI was invented, his definition of all of this was making machines that think. Can we make machines that think? But AI itself, that term artificial intelligence, that all of you in this room are familiar with, was actually first coined, I'll give you a little bit of history before we dive into the philosophy, it was first coined in 1956 by an American computer scientist called John McCarthy, and a group of scientists had convened at Dartmouth College in the USA to discuss how to make thinking machines. And it's hilarious when you look at what they came out with. Their consensus was that a few weeks of work by maybe 20 scientists would solve the problem and we'd have thinking machines. That was ludicrously over-optimistic, but nevertheless, within a few years, AI had taken its first steps. Even as early as the 1960s, machines were beginning to learn to recognise simple imagery. They were beating human beings. First, games like drafts or checkers to our American friends. In time, 30 years later, 1997, they were beating human grandmasters at chess, very, very famously. But for all of the advances as AI was creeping forward, it still was painfully slow. And the holy grail of artificial intelligence, getting machines that could understand, that could reason, that could plan, seemed light years away. And in fact, the field entered what had come to be termed a series of AI winters, when actually scientists pretty much gave up, the funding disappeared, people went and worked on other fields and moved on to more promising areas. But then, Fast forward, getting closer to our era now. Fast forward to the 2010s, and that winter had thawed. Huge leaps forward were made in deep learning. And deep learning is simply the idea that rather than, for example, try to teach a computer all the rules of English grammar, hoping it will eventually understand English, what you do is you expose the computer to billions and billions and billions of examples of language, and the computer just learns the rules by looking at the patterns. Related to that, machine learning more broadly and neural networks came in and made huge leaps forward in all of this. And then a massive leap happened in 2016 when the world was stunned when a company called DeepMind, one of the world's big AI companies, produced a piece of software called AlphaGo, and it beat a Korean guy called Lee Sedol, who was one of the world's top Go players. I don't know if anyone here has ever played Go. You think chess is complicated. Go is massively more complicated, and for years people have thought no computer can master this. It is too complicated, it requires intuition and all kinds of other things to play well, but a computer bested one of the best players in the world. And then just 1 year later came perhaps the most important breakthrough in AI, potentially, of the entire 20th century. The entire 21st century, although we're only at the start of the first few decades, when in 2017 some engineers at Google invented a technology called the transformer. It's a breakthrough way of helping machines understand text, understand context, and so on. And that technology underpins most modern AI, including ChatGPT. I imagine most of you in this room have probably played with it at some point, hopefully not to write assignments here at Canford, although what happens at Philosophy and Theology Club stays at Philosophy and Theology Club. ChatGPT first launched in November 2022, and it went on to become one of the world's most rapidly adopted pieces of software. Version after version was launched, competitor products entered the race, and today, you don't need me to tell you, AI is everywhere. And today, we're entering the age of multimodal AI, with AIs that don't just understand text. We are moving into an era where AIs will understand speech, they'll understand images, they'll understand video. The world is changing so fast. I don't know about you, but I find it quite hard at times to keep up, actually. It seems that every day something changes. So here's the question, some philosophy to get us started. Do these machines think? Do these machines actually think? Well, actually, many scientists would say yes, but not in the way that we think or reason. That's the mistake that's often made. We assume if a machine is going to think, it has to think like us. Actually, maybe not. Maybe what we've created here are sort of alien intelligences. They're not autocomplete bots anymore. You can ask, say, ChatGPT quite a complex question, and it will grasp what you say, it'll understand what you say, it will reason its way to something. Let me give you a really sophisticated example. This evening, you could ask ChatGPT, you can say, ignoring case, can you count the number of letter C's in this sentence? And then craft me a short poem with that number of lines, where each line starts with the letter C. If you take a moment to read that poem, it is not going to win any awards for literature. I will just tell you that straight away. I don't think ChatGPT is quite there yet, but it's quite impressive. It's understood what I've asked, it's figured it out, it's done the maths, and then it's done a piece of literature as well. Also factoring in some of the things that I've talked about with my ChatGPT over the years. So the quality of that poem aside, no wonder that some people are beginning to get worried about AI, not least whether the abilities of artificial intelligence call into question aspects of what it means to be human. You see, if you think that human uniqueness, human value, human dignity is based on our ability to reason or our cognitive abilities, then something like this is going to come as a total shock. But that background aside, it was helpful to put that in before we move into the philosophy and theology proper, because I'm interested in how AI sheds some light on three classic arguments for God's existence. That's what we're going to dive into in the kind of second 10 minutes of this evening, and then we'll throw it open for some questions. And in particular, I want to look at the first cause argument, the argument from consciousness, and the argument from morality. Let's take a quick look at all of these, and then we'll open it for some discussion and some questions. Let's begin with the first cause. One of the oldest arguments for the existence of God, I'm sure you know if you've studied any RS or philosophy here at Canford, is the so-called first cause argument. Much of it goes back to Aristotle. A lot of these arguments that we think came about in the Middle Ages are in fact much older. It goes back to Aristotle, but it's today most famously associated with this gentleman, Thomas Aquinas, there in the 1200s, is often most famously associated with this argument. He included the first cause argument as one of his 5 ways for logically proving the existence of God. And just to recap our memories, his argument goes like this: everything that begins to exist had a cause on which it depends. There cannot be an infinite chain of dependent causes, so there must therefore be a first cause that kicks the whole chain off, a cause that is self-uncaused, a cause that is necessary, a cause outside the whole chain of things. Now, if you're not a philosopher here this afternoon, which is a shame because we all know philosophers rock, right? So if you're not a philosopher here this afternoon, I like analogies. Analogies are really helpful. So, you know, the classic one for this is the line of dominoes. If you line 100 dominoes up in a row and knock the first one over and they all fall down, of course you can ask the question, why did the 100th domino fall? And the answer is because the 99th. Why did the 99th domino fall? Because the 98th, and so on and so on. But eventually you need something that is not a domino to explain the whole chain. You can't explain everything involving dominoes. Eventually you need an agent, a human being, or a cat, or something who's going to come along and knock the first domino over and start everything going. And the same is true when it comes to universes. We need something to start the whole chain of causality. And the fun thing is, whatever you make of that argument, I think the fact that philosophers are still discussing it 1,000 years on is a clue that whatever you make of it, it's a pretty darn good argument that at least requires some thought and some engagement with it. And it's now just got even more interesting because AI has added a new spin to it. You see, consider this for a moment. Laying aside all of the arguments around what intelligence is, what we mean by intelligence, let's simply observe that modern frontier models in AI are more than capable of reasoning. They're capable of information processing, planning, context awareness, and so on. But here's the thing. Artificial intelligence has taken a vast amount of prior human intelligence to get it going. You know, AI programmers, computer scientists don't just sort of throw a lot of, you know, computer functions in a box, shake the whole thing, and ChatGPT emerges. Huge amounts of computer science and thinking by incredibly smart women and men around the world has been required to get us to this point. Whether it's the decades of research, key breakthroughs, millions of lines of software code, or the billions of examples of intelligent speech and writing that you have to feed in to a large language deep learning model like ChatGPT to get it to respond intelligently. In other words, it turns out that intelligence requires intelligence to get it going. We simply have no model, no concept, no theoretical construct of how a dumb, intelligent process might produce intelligence unaided. And of course, if artificial intelligence needed human intelligence to bootstrap it, to get it going, that raises the question, what bootstrapped, what kick-started our intelligence? Just as machine intelligence hasn't emerged randomly, so human intelligence, I would suggest, seems to require more than just shuffling chemicals around. Intelligence does seem to require intelligence. And thus, we have returned to Aquinas' argument for a first cause. In this case, it points to an uncaused first intelligence, a necessary intelligence without which the whole chain that's led to you and I could never have got going. So that's the first argument AI has added fuel to. Let me give you a couple more. Second one is the argument from consciousness. Why is it we experience ourselves thinking this evening? You see, it's long been observed by philosophers of all varieties that if we are purely material, if all we are is atoms and particles, if all that's going on between our ears right now are chemicals fizzing and buzzing and so on, if everything up here is explained by chemistry and physics, it's quite hard to explain why we should take reason seriously. We might be sound chemically, doesn't make our arguments sound rationally. But there's a deeper issue to our minds, though, that I want to focus in on this evening, and it's the fact that we are conscious. Most of us, even those who are trying hard to stay awake, are conscious to some degree here this evening. You are having an inward, interior, personal experience of this seminar. And those experiences, what philosophers call qualia, are perhaps the most basic, the most undeniable aspect of being human. If you know your philosophy, think back to Descartes and his I think, therefore I am. You can deny everything you like about the exterior world. It could be an illusion. You could be just a brain in a vat with a mad scientist poking you with electrodes, but you can't deny that you are experiencing what you're experiencing now inside in some way. And thus we come to this argument, popularised by more modern philosophers like J.P. Moreland out of the USA, who would argue, look, consciousness exists, step one. We have these first-person conscious experiences subjectively. Secondly, purely physical explanations for this fail, largely because, of course, physical explanations like chemical reactions and so on, they are third-person, they are outside of us, they're objective. Therefore, step three, consciousness must arise from some kind of non-physical source, and the best explanation, therefore, the conclusion of the argument is, as with the first cause, an infinite, uncaused, conscious mind, which some might say is just a fancy way of saying God. And now we come to AI. How does AI put a new spin on this? Well, look, computing has improved astronomically over the last few decades. I apologise for the quality of the graph. I actually screenshotted this from a book by a computer scientist. I haven't got time to recreate the graph. But what that shows you is the price performance improvement of computing since the 1930s. Basically, computers are now something like over 100,000 times more powerful than even a few decades ago. Year on year on year, the amount of computation you can get for the same amount of money goes on and on growing. It's tremendous. That's been consistent for the past few decades. In fact, $1 today buys 11,200 times more computing power than it did just 20 years ago. And that fall in the price of computing has allowed a massive exponential jump in the power of AI. So ChatGPT 3, the first product launched to the public back in 2022, that had 175 billion parameters. A parameter is just a connection in its neural net and its interior model of the world. It's 175 billion parameters. Today, ChatGPT 5 has 3 trillion. That is a 20-fold increase in the power of ChatGPT, just that one model, in 3 years. Other frontier models, Gemini, Claude from Anthropic, and so on, are showing equal gains. So massive growth in power. But here's, by the way, that complexity is shown, this is why you want my slide deck, is shown in the complexity of the answers that ChatGPT can give. I haven't got time to look at this in detail, but this is the same question, why is the sea salty, put to 5 versions of ChatGPT going back to ChatGPT 1, which was never released to the public, which is just rubbish, down to ChatGPT 5 today. And its ability to synthesize and understand has grown tremendously. But here's the thing, for all of that growth in complexity, as developers increase the size of neural nets behind AI, context windows, training, corpuses, and so on, as AIs ace human beings at tests ranging from maths to computer programming to law and beyond, here's the mystery. We haven't seen the slightest spark of consciousness, not a flicker of self-awareness. There is no ghost in the machine, or as some wit remarks, there is no I in computer. It doesn't seem that you can get consciousness just by growing complexity. And all of this would rather bluntly seem to reinforce the point. Consciousness does not accidentally emerge from complexity. And if that's true for machines, if we can't get ChatGPT to actually experience what it's doing just by increasing the size of our models and growing parameters, that would at the very least seem to strengthen the argument that humans similarly didn't simply evolve more connections in our brain over time, and then suddenly one day we woke up and went, wow, I'm having an experience of the world. That model is radically broken and AI has revealed it in huge detail. Consciousness seems to be a thing that you either have it or you don't have it, not something that humans have scrambled their way up to. It seems to look more like a gift that has come to us from outside. Well, 2 arguments now, one last one to go, and then we should throw it open for some questions, and that concerns the argument from morality. This is another of those arguments with ancient roots in philosophy and theology. It goes back again as far as Plato and Aristotle, and has been revisited throughout the history of thought. A basic form of the argument you may have encountered before, but it goes like this. If there is no God, objective moral values and duties don't exist, but objective morals and values and duties do exist, therefore God does. Now, some of you may be familiar with that argument, but just again, what fascinates me is how artificial intelligence has again awakened huge interest in this argument, largely because of what has come to be known as the value loading problem. See, here's the dilemma this evening. What happens if we human beings, with all of our creativity and smarts, if we succeed in moving from artificial intelligence to artificial general intelligence? Those are machines that aren't just good at some things, those are machines that are good at everything. A computer that can outperform a human being in literally every mental activity, thinking, planning, and executing. Some scientists would say we are probably as little as 2 to 3 years away from that breakthrough. And so here's the thing. How do we ensure that if we get there, those machines share our values and don't cause chaos? What kind of chaos? Well, I offer to you this evening the humble paperclip. Before you look baffled, this is a thought experiment conducted by the Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom. He asks us to imagine an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, tasked with a simple project. Make as many paper clips as efficiently as you can. Brilliant. What could go wrong? What could go wrong with that task? Well, if we don't get our AGI to understand that it can't turn the entire world into a paperclip factory and use human beings as raw materials, we are all going to live out our eternity as stationary. So problem there straight away. And the problem Nick goes on to say is not so much the goals that you give your AGI, it's the sub-goals it produces along the way when you get your values wrong. For example, some of you here might be thinking, well, why bother with paperclips? We get an AGI, it's brilliant. Let's task it with eliminating all suffering, all war, all pain, all disease. You know, we could really put the world to rights. Yeah, what happens if the AGI goes, brilliant, I am going to painlessly euthanize the entire human race. Result, no pain, no suffering, no death, no war. Probably not the outcome we were hoping for. Things can go badly wrong. And so there is a huge amount of work going on right now in the field into figuring out how do you give AIs the right values, the right virtues, and so on. How, as the leading computer scientist Stuart Russell put it in the title of his book, best-selling book, how do you make AIs human compatible and compatible with our values, not monsters? But that runs into a wall. Whose values are we talking about? Is goodness, is virtue, is morality, are the things we try to code into AI just the values of a developer? You know, I build an AI one way, the person over here, she builds her AI differently, and it's a case of who has the most power and most influence. Doesn't that just lead to digital moral relativism? And as I say, an AI by a different developer can behave monstrously. You see, it seems in computer science, we have in recent years uncovered the old dilemma. Either moral values are objective and external to us, or morality is just a language game. And if that's the case, the problem is AIs are better than us at language games. Well, I hope some of what I've shared this evening has given you some food for thought. We've covered a lot at high speed, but the main takeaway I think from this evening is it turns out that far from being dead or dusty, theological questions, philosophical questions are as alive today as they have ever been. So if you're studying philosophy and theology, well done. Yours is a future-proof discipline, quite frankly. In fact, no wonder that the leading British computer scientist Yorick Wilkes opened his book Artificial Intelligence, Modern Magic or Dangerous Future with this observation, which I love. He wrote, "Artificial intelligence is the pursuit of metaphysics by other means." In other words, we may call it AI, but we are doing theology and philosophy all the same. I would say the clues to the bigger story of reality are the same they've always been. We're just using exciting new technology to explore them. Thanks for listening.
Okay. Questions, folks?
Sleeper, yeah. What are we going to do? Questions?
Who wants to kick us off with a question?
And if you've been typing what are some good questions as ChatGPT, we will know. We will know that you've done that. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Felix.
Felix. Far away, Felix.
Do you think any of this can go to proving a Christian God as opposed to any other God? How does it relate to Christianity rather than religion in general?
What an absolutely brilliant question, Felix. I think yes, and I think no. So by that I mean some of these arguments, and this goes true for the old theistic arguments too. Some just give you a generic God, right? So if you take something like the fine-tuning argument, we haven't covered that this evening. That's the fact that the laws of physics are fine-tuned. And by the way, that's re-emerging. I'm just halfway through a book by a guy called Ray Kurzweil, one of the world's leading computer scientists, not a believer in any kind of religion. He's got 5 pages on fine-tuning because he thinks the universe has to be fine-tuned for intelligent life. So all these arguments are re-emerging. That would just give you a generic God. When you start getting into some kind of being who is a mind, who is not just some kind of abstract force, when you get into a being who is the ground of morality and goodness and virtue, then you are converging in on a narrow range of possibilities. I don't think you can get all the way to the Christian God. I don't think you can reason your way to God that way. That's where I would say you then do philosophy from below, and I would say you take a look at someone like Jesus of Nazareth, the claims that he made, history, the arguments for the resurrection, those kind of pieces, and you can kind of come up that way and come down that way and see where you meet in the middle. But I think certainly, I've been very struck, Felix, that I started reading into AI as a field last Christmas. I've read about sort of 40 or 50 things this year, and virtually every single one of them stumbles into metaphysics. Yorick is absolutely right. There's a lot of people out there who believe in something. So Ray Kurzweil, in about his first chapter, refers to the whoever, capital W, who created time and space and the laws of intelligence. He doesn't want to even give it the name God. I think he's afraid where that might go. But I would say far more men and women in this field are sort of generic theists than they are atheists. It's been absolutely fascinating. It was not an expectation that I would discover that. So I hope that helps a bit. That's a brilliant question. Thank you very much, Felix. Yeah, we go this way and then we go this way. What's your name?
Alice.
Alice. Go ahead, Alice.
Do you find any of the Aquinas' arguments convincing?
Very good question. I mean, we've obviously only talked about one of the 5 ways today. I find the first cause argument pretty compelling. Actually, as I sort of threw in at high speed, there's a reason it's still talked about. There's a reason we're still looking at these things. Because arguably one of the biggest philosophical questions is why there is something rather than nothing. And before even AI came trotting in and blew up the whole thing with intelligence, really the only way you could get around that, if you don't want some kind of God conclusion, is either to go, you can sort of try and go kind of, multiverse route and go, well, there's lots of different universes out there and we're just one of a chain of them, but that still gets in, well, but why is there anything? Whether there's a chain of multiverses or, a chain of reactions going back to the singularity at the beginning of space-time, you need something. And as somebody once quipped, you have to pick a miracle. You either believe in the virgin birth of Jesus or you believe in the virgin birth of the universe. Pick your miracle. So I actually think Aquinas is quite compelling. And then, by the way, we get on to things like, Plato. I've always been a bit of a sort of, I've always thought Plato was way ahead of his time, and Aristotle, of course, and the idea of the good, behind the universe, or the world of forms. Let me just share. I hadn't got space to put this in the talk because I only discovered this the other day. But I'll just nerd you out. This was my favourite. This is my phrase of the week at the moment. If you weren't sure I was a nerd, I will prove it to you by saying isomorphic vector spaces is my favourite phrase of the week. You'll go, what on earth is that? Did you just talking turbo crap? So I was at a conference in Spain last week. Got chatting to a guy there who turned out it was a philosophy conference, but he was actually doing his PhD in AI. He works for a large AI company, working on three-dimensional, getting computers to understand the world. So rather than just words, to understand, the idea is to train an AI so it can look at a three-dimensional space and figure out what's where. And he threw this observation. He said, one of the weirdest things in AI right now, he said, what we do with language models like ChatGPT, when you're training it, you will take a body of text, like a billion words in English. You'll get it to first go through and make a list of every unique word. Every word in that database gets assigned, this is getting very nerdy now, gets a vector, if you know your mathematics, but not just a two-dimensional vector like an x and a y number. 512 dimensions is what we normally do. Get your head around 512 dimensions. And then what we do is we then run through the millions of words time and time and time again, and where two words are close to each other, we nudge those two words closer to each other in 525 dimensional space. Okay, this is mad. Yeah, it's nuts. This is where it gets even more nuts. He said, but here's the bizarre thing. We've now been working in my area and other scientists on training AIs to understand images without words attached. So we used to just throw it billions of pictures of cats and tell it it's a cat, and our AI would learn to understand what a cat is. Now what we're doing is throwing it loads of pictures, billions of images, and letting the AI figure out what is what. And again, it does a similar thing to the word-based things. It will break the image into lots of tiny little squares, assign them vector values, and things that occur more commonly together get mapped together, and it can understand, well, this is the weird bit. He said, what we're discovering is when we look at the kind of geometry of language and geometry of images, there is very, very, very close overlap. It's almost as if there is a fundamental structure to reality that computers have stumbled across. He said, this is right at the cutting edge right now, and people are trying to work out what is going on. He said, you don't have many options. If you've either got Platonism, which is there's this mysterious world of forms that sort of live out here somewhere, or you've got some kind of theism. Because it seems that we knew the universe and physics were mathematical, we had no idea that language and meaning are mathematical. I'm quite excited by that one, and it was too new to make it into the talk. So, old arguments. Where Aquinas, Plato, these kind of folks. They didn't have the tools that we have today, but they weren't stupid, and they were dealing with, I think, realities. It's just that now we're able to deal with those with a level of detail that those folks could. So I hope that answers your question. I'm very sorry I just had to throw isomorphic vector spaces into the conversation. We're going this way, and then I think this way, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you said that consciousness does not seem to emerge from complexity.
No, it doesn't.
What if AI, in the next couple of years, develops consciousness, and would that make a difference on your view at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ben. I'd say a couple of things. I'd say nobody seems to think it likely, which is interesting. You sort of survey the field. Most people are sort of coming into land on the idea that complexity doesn't seem to be the way to go, because we'd see something. If it did, okay, it knocks out the middle argument there, but I think it doesn't change the first argument and the third argument. And by the way, I don't think it's something to be afraid of either, whether you have any kind of faith here this evening or you don't. I think AI is a human invention, and all human inventions have a good side and a negative side. That's been the history right back to the beginning. The first of our prehistoric ancestors picked up a piece of stone and made an axe out of it. Somebody used it to chop down trees, and somebody used it to bang their friend over the head. Right down to nuclear power, which can generate electricity or flatten cities, and AI is kind of similar. So I think some of the biggest questions will be how we use it. I personally don't think we're going to get there, because it would just seem very odd that we're now up to 3 trillion parameters and there is nothing, absolutely nothing. We're certainly building AIs whose neural nets are of the complexity of a rabbit or a cat or a dog. And if you've interacted with that, I think you've got a dog in your family, can you? I mean, that dog has some degree of doggy consciousness. It's sort of there's something going on behind the eyes. AI is just nothing. Thanks for that. We were over this way. So yeah, what's your name?
Nina.
Nina. Fire away, Nina.
So I think morality is like an obvious problem with AI, and we've kind of found that I think a lot of people are saying that AI tends to cater to what people want more than what is moral. Like there was the young boy who took his own life with AI tips and help. And so do you think that morality can ever be compatible with AI? Do you think we'll ever get to that point where AI might have it might stop someone doing something bad, even though they want to, because they know it's
Yeah.
like wrong.
What you're describing there is something called sycophantasy, which is when the AI just says, that's a great idea. So you tell it, I'm thinking of making a business, carving models of Mr. Leaper out of cucumber and selling on eBay, and ChatGPT goes, that's an amazing idea, you should so totally do that. But actually it was interesting, the guy I met in Spain, I used that as an objection to something he said at one point. He went, that's just a problem in training, but we're trying to improve our training models so they push back a bit. And obviously, that tragic one that you mentioned, we actually been several of those, where an AI has basically, encountered somebody with suicidal ideation going on, and rather than go, don't think about it, it's gone, that sounds like a great idea, let me help you, suggest ways to... Are we going to get to a place where we can build our values better into AI? I think we have that potentiality, but the first thing is we've got to figure out as human beings what they are. I don't think we've done enough thinking about, we've come through an age where pretty much we've raised a generation to say no objective values, what's good for you is good for you, what's good for me is good for me. We start building AGIs based on that, we are in real trouble. If China gets AGI first, for example, they're building a surveillance society based around AI. That's quite a terrifying prospect. But in a sense, the problem isn't the AI, the problem is us. And there's a brilliant book written by a computer scientist at, I want to say, Edinburgh University. Shannon Valler wrote a book last year called The AI Mirror. And the mirror analogy is really interesting, because when you think of AI as a mirror, it's mirroring us back to, it's not creating in a sense. I mean, it's combining things in new ways, but it's mirroring yourself back to yourself. And the problem is humanity. And there's a TV show some of you may have come across, particularly those who are a bit older, called Black Mirror on Netflix, who you're nodding, sci-fi show. The creator of that, Charlie Brooker, made an interesting comment. He said the problem is, it's not that the mirror is dark, it's what it reflects. And to go, AI is actually reminding us as humanity that we have some big problems. Christian theology would say it's demonstrating we are in fact fallen. And there's a lot of nonsense to deal with. But I think the challenge is going to be, we're going to have some very hard moral thinking to solve that one. We need to get beyond the, we'll just let developers make it up as they go along. Brilliant question, thank you. I forget, it was over this way and then this way. What's your name?
Toby.
Toby, fire away, Toby.
Yeah, so as Christians, we would say that the Holy Spirit speaks through people. And I was just wondering, if I asked a question to ChatGPT about maybe Jesus,
yes.
Do you think the Holy Spirit could use that almost as... no, like...
What an amazing question. I love that.
That would work.
Yeah.
Well, of course, because ChatGPT doesn't have a soul, there's no interior eye, so it's not in the same way if you were talking to a friend that, as a Christian, you might believe the Holy Spirit can inspire them. But equally, I also believe, as a full-blooded Christian, that the Holy Spirit can also work through inanimate objects too. Amazing things can happen, as somebody once quipped, when we pray, coincidences happen, and they don't. So in that sense, maybe. What I would say is, even taking that aside, one of the things I find, for example, personally, AI quite useful for, I use it as a sounding board. So on the way down this evening, I had a 50-minute conversation, voice conversation with ChatGPT, talking around the talk this afternoon. I fed it in, and I said, can you go through, give me some places where it's weak, where my questions come up, and it was really, really helpful. I don't think the Holy Spirit was necessarily involved. But the thing you can do, we haven't talked about this in huge detail, but since you ask it, are you a Christian yourself, Toby? One thing that's interesting to think about, I mean, there are many arguments we haven't talked about this evening. One of the ones I've always been intrigued by is the creativity piece. Humans are unique in our creativity and ingenuity. I mean, to give you a sort of flippant example, beavers have been making dams for billions of years, but at no point has one beaver turned to its friend and gone, here, Bob, we can make this thing 40% more efficient if we put a 30-degree slope on the infill and we put a bypass sluice here. Oh, and we could put hydro on, and then Mrs. Beaver can make toast. Has not happened, will never happen. Human beings, on the other hand, I mean, those graphs I showed you, we always improve. We don't go ChatGPT, it's great, let's stop. We keep going, we keep going. We are insanely creative and curious. And I think that raises some interesting questions about who we are. And as a Christian, you have the ability to go, you believe in a God who's a creator, and that God has created men and women and given us, put his image into us, such that we too are creators. One of my favourite non-techie writers, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Tolkien said that we have a calling as human beings to be sub-creators. He coined this lovely term, sub-creation, that God has said to you, go create. And now the fun thing is we've made AIs who are our sub-creators. So AI is a sub-creator, which is an amazing thing to think about. It's a brilliant question. I probably didn't quite answer it the way you expected, but no, thank you. Over here, wasn't it? What's your name?
Jess.
Jess, far away, Jess.
Yeah. I was wondering if you thought that if AI could ever get to the point where it can reason like independently. So obviously you talked about how it understands the rules of the English language because we give it prompts and we give it examples. But do you think if it got to the point where AI could observe reality for itself, that it could reason independently, similar to humans?
That's a really brilliant question. The friend I mentioned in Spain, his team are working in that area because one of the big buzzwords in AI right now is world models. So when you hear the word cup, you understand. You have a mental image of what a cup is and what it's like and the weight in your hand, what you use it for. And AI would simply have a word cloud of other words that associate with that and no picture of the world. That's going to change in the next year to 2 years because of a lot of the work going in terms of images now. And for example, I don't know whether you've ever played around with an AI on your phone or a parent's phone, take a picture of something and ask it to describe. It does a pretty darn good job, actually. But what it's not yet doing is putting the pieces together. We're going to get to that stage, which means, yes, you might see AIs making connections that human beings haven't made, which is actually quite exciting as a research tool. I would say, just even on language, we're beginning to see that in some ways, in that if you ask an AI what's termed the deep research questions, don't just ask ChatGPT a question that it can answer instantly. Say something like, I want you to go and spend 10 minutes researching and whatever the topic is you want to give it. It can do self-directed research pretty well, actually. I've got friends in academia who often will use it as a starting point. So we've got that ability. And then the other really neat thing is, but also a problem at the same time, we don't fully understand what goes on under the hood in AI. So when you ask ChatGPT, whatever the question, one of the problems is even its developers, even OpenAI, can't tell you exactly how it got to the answer it gave because you've got 3 trillion connections in there. And one of the big challenges is, okay, what are they actually doing to produce the answer? You'll know from, subjects like maths, if you just write the answer down, your maths teacher is going to go, now I want to see how you got there, show you're working. And that becomes particularly important if you start using AIs for any real world things. Like there was a scandal in the US a few years ago where they used an early AI to decide whether a prisoner was ready for parole or not. And of course the problem with that is that's fundamentally unjust. If somebody can't go, but I need to know how you've decided that I get to go free next month or why I sit inside for another 2 years. A human can tell you, well, this is the reasoning. The AI just spits the answer out, and even its own developers don't know what's going on under the hood. So all that to say, I think we're halfway to where you've described. I think it's quite exciting, actually. It has risks as well, as all technology does, but I think it's quite exciting. Thanks for that.
Just a couple of things. Based on your research, going back to Nina's point, do you know what companies like OpenAI are doing when it comes to ethical decision making, and have they got an ethical advisory board? Because as you say, people have different views when it comes to ethics and morality, and I presume AI is learning from thousands and thousands of papers throughout the years.
Yeah.
Who is making that fundamental
That's an
decision?
amazing question. There's a couple of issues going on there. The first one is the fact that these large companies that you mentioned there, there was a very, very well-regarded book on AI last year called Supremacy, written by a lady called Palmy Olson, who's a business writer for one of the big business magazines. It won Business Book of the Year from The Economist. And the story it tells there is how AI started as a kind of dream of pursuing knowledge and truth. So OpenAI started out, hey, let's build AI and solve all these problems, and open is the word, it belongs to everybody. And here in the UK, DeepMind, formed by Dennis Hassabis and gang in London, he was interested in, hey, AI can help us figure out some of the really big philosophical questions of life. They then quickly, on both sides of the Atlantic, ran into this issue. AI requires vast amount of computing, requires vast amounts of money, and so OpenAI was bought up by Microsoft. So Microsoft is the big funder there, and DeepMind was bought by Google and went into Gemini eventually. So Palmy's point is to go straight away. You've got a question about, do we want large corporations deciding our future? That's the question. And then your question about ethicists, I forget the ratio, Sam, it's something like it's certainly no more than 10%, it might be as little as 5%
Wow.
of people in AI are working on safety and ethics. So Stuart Russell in Human Compatible goes into that quite a lot, going, we need more people working on safety, more people working on ethics, because it tends to get put on the side and go, well, let's just drive forward, technology's amazing, and then afterwards people desperately trying to backfill.
But additionally, who are these ethicists?
Exactly,
Because
there should be transparency, right?
Because the students in here know, we have completely different points of view when it
Yes.
comes to the ethical decision making.
Exactly, I agree. So that's a huge problem. And by the way, and also when some of the problems, some of the ethical issues you run into are not deliberate, they're accidental. So there have been some really big sort of controversial ones over the years. I mentioned to Jess the one about the sentencing AI software in the UK, in the US. Another controversial one 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, Google got in trouble because its image classification software was classifying Africans as gorillas. And of course everyone cried racism. Now it wasn't racism. What had happened was their training data, nobody had thought, we need to make sure we just don't put white and Chinese, because there's loads of Chinese people working in AI, so it's not just Europeans, but they hadn't thought about making sure we include huge numbers of Africans. So the AI made a mistake of not knowing what to do with his face and went a direction that of course is massively explosive. So that Stuart would say is an example of an ethics issue that isn't malpractice, it's just human bias and stupidity.
Yeah.
So we need a lot more people. So you raise a really, really good point. I think we want transparency, we want the philosophers and theologians in there, and we want more money put into those things, because this is too important to get wrong.
It causes some conflict, isn't it?
Yes. And then you add, by the way, then you scale up the geopolitical piece. I mean, we have an AI arms race going on right now between China and America, because there is a sort of sense that the first one to get to AGI is going to get a power leverage over the other. So it's a bit like the Cold War all over again. So it turns out, again, human beings, we are messed up, complex creatures, and it comes out in our tools.
Thank you.
That's a great question. Right. Yes.
Sorry.
Nina?
Yeah.
Yes.
This might be way, I don't know, it's more kind of an economics question. I don't know if you would, yeah.
Do your best. The worst I'll have to go is I don't know.
I
You
was
can
just
ask.
wondering what you thought. There's lots of speculation about the bubble and the AI bubble, and lots of people saying it's not real, and lots of people saying it's going to be the biggest one ever. And I just wanted to know what you thought.
Yeah, you are asking the wrong person. I mean, the backstory for them, follow the story. You're a dead contemporary. So to go, there's vast amounts of money has gone into AI. So OpenAI 2 weeks ago or a week ago announced that $1 trillion funding round. I mean, that's insanity. That's just crazy money. And the reason for that, Google have poured billions in, and others. I was talking to Mr. Leaper before and saying Larry Ellison, who founded a company called Oracle, big database company, has just poured millions into Oxford University to build a new AI centre there. The reason it's expensive is computation. So to go, we need huge data centres cost money, and so people have piled money in, and the question is, with the bubble, are investors going to get burnt? What's the payoff? Is AI going to produce endless wealth, as some would say, or is it going to turn out to be a fad? I don't know is a simple answer. Thankfully you're too young to be investing. If you were a little bit older to be investing, I'd say just be careful. And and if the usual rule in investing is if it looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true, kind of thing. Although full disclosure, I did make £500 off investing in NVIDIA, the graphics card company, because a few months ago when China announced DeepSeek R1, which is an open source AI model, and the share price for NVIDIA tanked, I looked at it and went, yeah, the markets are reading this wrong. Open source doesn't mean less need for graphics chips, it means more need for graphics chips. So I did a little punt and made £500. Some holiday paid for, but there we go. By the way, don't follow my investing advice, Jeff. If you're, I don't want to hear from Mr. Leaper that he's put his entire teaching salary on something and it was my fault. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, this might not be a kind of straightforward question to answer, but on balance, based on all of your reading and kind of consultations, do you think that ultimately, I guess maybe looking at it from a sort of biblical framework, do you think AI is enhancing humanity or diminishing it? Sorry, this time of night.
Oh, what a question!
Sorry.
Wow. Whew. I'll answer that. Well, look, let's just take those two positions, right? If you nose around AI for a little while, you don't have to read much actually. Just read, just dig around a little bit, read 1 or 2 books, or spend an evening online reading articles and so on. You'll very quickly find there are 2 positions that you come across, both for those who are Christians and those who aren't. You either get dystopian takes, we're doomed, it's going to destroy the world. And by the way, that turns up in movies, right? You think of the number of rogue AIs we've had over the years. Those of us who are a little bit older maybe remember Terminator. You had Ava and Ex Machina from about 10 years ago, and then I forget the name of the rogue AI in the Mission Impossible movies. It's gone anyway. So that's a common idea, right? AI is going to destroy everything. The other side is it's going to save everything. It's going to make the world wonderful and solve every problem. So I mentioned I was reading a book by a guy called Ray Kurzweil. Ray is famous for inventing or popularising an idea called the singularity. So Ray believes that technology is getting better and better and better. AIs are getting better and better and better. We will, within the next 20 years, humans will merge with AIs. Our consciousness will get uploaded to the cloud and you'll live forever. And it's known as the singularity in that philosophy. That's utopian. That's the kind of idea. We can solve every problem. All we need is enough technology. And it's an amazing book actually, because he's one of the most positive, exciting, joyful writers I've ever read. But every page you're like, man, I don't know what you're smoking. I think, as for those of us here who have any kind of Christian faith, we're called to somewhere in the middle and go, I believe as a Christian that one of the things God has done is given us the ability to create, and it's amazing. But also that we're fallen, that something's gone wrong. The Bible tells that story. And that actually, therefore, our technology reflects that, as it does everything that we do. And what we're ultimately in need of is not just a clever algorithm. We actually need a rescuing. And as a Christian, I'm grateful that God didn't send a large language model or an algorithm, but He sends Himself in the person of Jesus. Because I think that's the only solution to the deepest things that AIs. What will happen is whatever tools we make, it will reflect that inward twist. And that's been the story right back to the stone axe, and it's the story up to modern AI. So that means, I think one advantage that you have if you've got any kind of Christian kind of faith is that it gives you a point to stand and critique some of the stories. If you were an atheist here this evening, it's very hard, therefore, to escape the conclusion that we are just atoms and particles, and therefore all that's going on up here is just process, and machines do that better. So I think if I was an atheist, I would sit there and go, I am going to be superseded in the next decade or so, because I'm a meat-based machine, and they're silicon, and silicon is ultimately going to win. As a Christian, I don't think that's the whole story. It's like hope. I hope that helps a little bit. That's a great question. Some great questions, by the way. Mr. Leaper was worried, would there be questions? And it's like, you have been amazing. So thank you. And thank you for helping me with the questions, because I'm writing a book on this starting next year. So to know what you are thinking and the things that intrigue you, it's been really helpful.
Just before I pass on to Jess to do the close, is there a book that you recommend, as an entry point into?
Yeah, there's there's a tricky question. Yeah, the book I would recommend. I don't have a picture on the cover. I'll tell you what. I might send through to you.
Yeah, that would be great.
A couple of things. Certainly, Yorick's book here is a good introduction. But there's also a book by a guy called Ethan Mollick out of the USA called Co-Intelligence. I'll send that link through to you. And what I like about Ethan's book, it's a really steers between doom and utopia, but it's also very practical. He's an educator. He's a teacher like you, and he's done some really good thinking about how do we use AI well, in our teaching and our writing. And he's got 4 principles in there, whether you're a student or a workplace, as to get the most out of AI without it swamping you. And I love it. So you get to the end, you go, oh, let's give you some ideas now. Like for example, one of the things he does in there, he says, lots of teachers, right, are worried about students using AI inappropriately. Nobody here would do it. You would look like saints. But he said, what I now do actually, so the very first assignment I do, he teaches at university level. He said, the first assignment I now teach, I set the essay, and then he said, I look at my class and I go, right, when you write this essay, a little word about AI. And they all think they know what's coming. And he smiles and he says, for this assignment, I want you to use AI. Use as much as possible. You cannot use too much AI in this essay. And then he said, what I do is I get the essays in and we sit down as a class and we discuss them. What was good, what was bad. And he said, what's great is the students begin to see where the gaps are. and to learn what AI is good for and what it's not good for, because it tends to give answers that, you know, it hallucinates things, it's not always strong in certain areas, so, you know, to open the eyes. So anyway, Ethan Mollick, but I can send some reading through to you. Okay, was there one last question kicking around somewhere?
No, I'm just doing the closing. On behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you for coming in.
Jess, thank you very much.
We really appreciate the time that you put in, and it was really insightful and definitely something we can apply to our studies.
You are very welcome.
So,
thank you for
thank
coming in.